What's up guys, so today I want to make a video on two of my favorite video game franchises, Mass Effect and Cyberpunk 2077, and what each game and each franchise could learn from the other. So really it's just going to boil down to one major decision for each game, for each franchise. So we're going to start off with what Cyberpunk 2077 could learn from Mass Effect. And that would be Mass Effect's choice-based system, their decision-based system. Cyberpunk's choice-based and decision-based system is a lot more contained than Mass Effect, a lot more smaller scale than what Mass Effect offers. 2077's decisions and choices matter more in the immediate future rather than in the long run. Whereas Mass Effect, I believe, does both, right? You have decisions and choices, dialogue choices that affect the immediate future as well as things that, might affect thing in the next two games. Of course, there are a few standout decisions and choices that do matter in Cyberpunk, things that might affect the end of the story or a character's fate, but nothing to the extent of what Mass Effect has done in all three or even four of their games. Mass Effect's decisions and choices have a lot more broader and interconnected effects on the on the story, on the universe that you're living in, on the characters that you see, the characters you work with, all the characters that you meet. Decisions you make can and will affect characters and the world that you're living in the future and in the immediate time that you're currently living in. Spoilers in case you haven't played Mass Effect and you want to, but an example is, in the first Mass Effect game, early on in the game, actually, I'd say one of the major decisions, one of the biggest decisions in all three Mass Effect games is choosing who to save, Kaidan Alenko or Ashley Williams. We're going to go with what I chose and what I believe most people chose, that's saving Ashley Williams. If you do so, Ashley will be in the first game, second game, and third game, but Kaidan Alenko won't. The fact that he's dead means that characters will talk about him, will reference him in all three games. And they won't talk about him like he's still alive. No, everybody knows that he's dead. So that's how they'll talk about him, as if he's no longer there because, well, he's not. And the same thing goes for Ashley Williams. If she's not there, then they're gonna act like she's not there because she's not. She's no longer there. That affects the immediate future and the long run. It affects your character roster, the abilities that you have on your team, right? Kaidan Alenko and Ashley Williams are two different types of characters, you could say. Ashley's a Marine, more of a grunt, if you want to say, right? More boots on the ground. She doesn't have biotics, or so she doesn't have these superpowers. Kaidan Alenko, he still very much has those same skill sets, but he's biotic. So I guess you could say by losing Kaidan Alenko, you lost a more powerful character. Meaning in the games that you have Ashley Williams, you won't have those abilities, right? You lost a more powerful character. If you chose Kaidan Alenko, then on your team, you still have that biotic teammate. And that's just one example, honestly, a very simple example compared to some of the other ones in the games of how decisions you make will affect the immediate future and the long term. Another major one that spans across all three games is the Rachni. So in Mass Effect 1, if you choose to help and save the Rachni Queen, then in Mass Effect 3, when you have that big battle that you need all the help you can get the help of the Rachni because you chose to save the Rachni Queen. If you chose to let her die, then you wouldn't have had her to help, and you wouldn't have had any of the Rachni to help. So yeah, those are just a couple examples of how Mass Effect's choice-based system compares to Cyberpunk's. That's not to say Cyberpunk's isn't good at all, right? It isn't in-depth at all, because I think that would be unfair to say, but like I said before, I just don't think it's to the extent of what Mass Effect has done. Perhaps it's a little unfair to honestly compare it to Mass Effect. Who knows? I don't think anybody's really done it as well as them. It takes a lot of time and effort and just, pre-planning to do all of that. Now, as for what Mass Effect could learn from Cyberpunk, I think it has to do with the side characters, the companions, and how these characters affect the main story, or I guess in Mass Effect's case, the lack of effect on the story as a whole. I think side characters, or again in Mass Effect's case, companions, should be less self-contained in terms of their main stories, in terms of their stories, I should say, and have a more broader effect on the story and the universe as a whole. Because when you take a look at Mass Effect side characters, their stories, they are, like I said, self-contained, right? They focus heavily on the characters themselves and don't really have any emphasis on the main story as a whole. And that's not a problem, especially when you want to kind of flesh out these characters. But I do think you can do that and also have them integrated into the main story as well, as Cyberpunk does. Pretty much all of the side characters in Mass Effect 2, which is what I actually want to focus on because that's really the main game that has these side character content. They all have a common theme of family, right? You look at Tali having to deal with her father, looking at Samara and her daughter, you look at Thane and his son, Jacob and his father, Miranda and her father and her sister. They all have a common theme of family, but really that's all they focus on. They don't ever really touch on the main story as a whole, right? The collectors. And again, that's not a problem, especially when you want to flesh out these characters, but Cyberpunk, I think, does both, right? They flesh out these characters by having you talk and interact with these characters a lot. But in those missions, in their missions, they still have a lot to do, or even a little bit to do with the main story. And even that little bit that has to do with the story, it's more than what Mass Effect really did in Mass Effect 2. What I will give to Mass Effect 2, though, is the fact that with those character missions, if you don't do all of them, your characters, or those characters, those companions, technically aren't quote unquote loyal to you. So they have a higher chance of dying in the final mission in Mass Effect 2. And that's not a small thing, right? That's something pretty major. If those characters die, they won't show up in Mass Effect 3. And that's just one thing, right? Though you could argue, I guess, that that one major thing kind of compensates for the lack of other connections to the main story. But I'm gonna argue that it doesn't, just because this whole game is essentially you creating a task force to go stop the collectors at the end of the game, and you doing these character companion missions takes up a lot of the game. And you know, like I said, like I've been saying, these character missions don't necessarily connect to the main story that much. The only way it really connects are with the fact that these characters are helping you stop, you know, the collectors who are part of the main story, and the fact that these characters, if you don't do their missions, they have a higher chance of dying in that mission at the end. If we take a look at Panam in Cyberpunk 2077, right, probably the biggest side character in the game, and you need her help to capture Anders' helmet to get information on the relic, but to do that first, you need to help her. Then you guys have a little back and forth thing going on for a little bit, and after you capture Anders Hellman, that's pretty much it for her time in the main story up until the very end, where you're able to call her to help you raid Arasaka. She's a side character who was introduced to help you with something regarding the main story, right? You guys work together for a little bit regarding something connected to the main story, and then she goes back to being a side character up until the very end. And that's not even it for her time in the game. You can still do her character mission, her side story. And while her side story is very personal, yes, very personal to the Aldecaldos and her, still connects back to the main story because of what I mentioned before. The Aldecaldos, you're able to call her and the Aldecaldos at the very end to help you raid Arasaka. And one on another smaller scale is when you do these side missions with Panam, you know, you get to know each other a little more, and you know, the intimacy and all that. And she soon finds out that the reason V is doing all of this, going through all of this, is because of the chip in their head, because they're dying. The same thing goes for Rogue, who I mentioned before. She was introduced as a side character to help you with something regarding the main mission. She was also connected to V and Johnny with the fact that, you know, she was Johnny's ex back in the day, and Johnny's on the relic, which is stuck in her head. Once again, a side character connected to the main mission in some way, shape, or form. And another major way she connects to the story is with the fact that you can also call Rogue to help you raid Arasaka instead of calling the Aldecaldos, for example. The same thing goes for Judy and Evelyn. Judy, you meet her through Evelyn because she's the one that hired you to go and steal the relic. After everything goes wrong, V seeks out Evelyn. Evelyn's missing, so you go talk to Judy. Judy leads you to Clouds, and that's a whole debacle. And all that leads into Judy's side thing. That doesn't go anywhere in terms of the main story, but that's still something. And even that technically still connects to the main story, just because Evelyn is the one that hired you to go steal the relic in the first place. Even if going to save her technically doesn't connect to the main story, it doesn't help the ending or change the ending in any way, shape, or form, it still connects just because of that simple fact. Judy leads you to Clouds, which is still part of the main mission, but since Clouds was a dead end, now you go to Panam. Once again, Judy, a side character, helping you something regarding the main mission. Hopefully you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. Hopefully I'm explaining it in a way that everybody can understand, because I tend to just kind of blurt out my thoughts in hopes that everybody understands what I'm talking about. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you play Mass Effect or Cyberpunk, chances are you have thoughts on this, right? And chances are if you played Cyberpunk, you also played Mass Effect and vice versa, so you most likely have thoughts on this. So please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's conversate about this. This was something I kind of randomly thought of, just a random quick little video. Once again, just kind of blurting out my thoughts. But yeah, as always, if you enjoyed the video, like it up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.